For part 2 of the lunch program, please welcome the panel on The Art of Storytelling, Shaping Culture, Identity, and Global Impact, moderated by Milken Institute Senior Advisor Louise Tabiner.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, guys.
Hi.
So we are here today to talk about storytelling. Storytelling transcends generations, mediums, time. Let me tell you a story can potentially be the 6 most powerful words in communication. From the Quran to ancient Greece to TikTok, storytelling is important for brands, how you identify as a human with your family, with your country, with films. So I'm honored and excited to be here today with 2 amazing voices that can talk to us about storytelling and the transformational identity associated with the brands and stories that you have both told. So we will start with Edward Norton, one of the most critically acclaimed actors of his generation, certainly. 50 films, I think produced 13, or maybe wrote 5. I don't know.
Yep.
You've been in so many awards.
Good memory.
I cannot remember the list, and I don't want to read it. But in addition to that, I think there are many things that people don't know about Edward, and that's he was a Middle East major at Yale. He speaks Japanese. He was a competitive rower, and he has been extremely philanthropic, working with an affordable housing. That was actually his first career, slightly less sexy maybe in some ways than the one that followed, but affordable housing and a climate activist. And I don't know if activist is the right word, but he doesn't want to be identified by any of these. I have learned in getting to know Edward better. But the one thing that he is willing to be identified as is a surfer. And so somehow the storytelling conversation that we're supposed to have today, Edward would like it to evolve around the identity.
Well, we want to be identified by our passions, right?
So tell us, and I lived in Malibu before moving to the UAE, so I feel like I got a glimpse of what that cult, some might call it, is like. Or is it a lifestyle, a brand, and why is that your number one identity?
No, we talked about this a little last night, joking aside. I think we all get together in these kind of convenings, and you meet people. Elie and I met just in the last 2 nights, and I think the collision of people who are engaged in different enterprises, and finding commonality, finding aligned mission is really valuable. Sometimes a big event like this, you say like, wow, there's so much going on, but it's like molecules, and we're all colliding and sharing stories and talking to each other and coming to understand what our priorities are and what can we learn from each other. It's really valuable. And I think, I do think, though, we tend to talk about economics and we tend to talk about economic growth and opportunity, which is great. It's important. But I also think, as I've reached kind of crossed my midlife thing, I've realized that if it's not in balance, if you're not still achieving personal growth, if you're not expanding your own horizons, if you're not focusing on your own health, a lot of the growth starts to become empty and meaningless. The maximization of everything without quality of life is something I've had to focus on balancing more. And so, joking aside, for me, surfing's been a later in life discovery that's really kind of centered me again. And I think it's if you're lucky in life, you find new adventures and new pursuits, and that's what it's been for me. But I think to your point, like I have lots of people ask me, like I'm involved in businesses. I've started businesses and quietly run them, and I've been involved in
I forgot about that.
in
He's
finance
also an
and things.
entrepreneur.
And people sometimes they make, I think, I bet Elie agrees with this because you're involved in creativity and enormous growing business, but I think people create a false dichotomy between the right brain and the left brain. They think that creativity and storytelling is somehow different from the business enterprise, and I totally disagree. I think that launching new ideas in any form, social entrepreneurship, business entrepreneurship, fundamentally is a storytelling. It begins with storytelling. You've got to have a story for yourself of why are you doing something, and then you've got to start telling that story to other people, and you've got to make them feel connected to your enterprise, and it is an entirely creative act. And I think, and then at the same time, purely storytelling, telling movies, things like that, it's an enormous logistical and analytical process that engages your right and your left brain. So I've
maybe we just go back to the
found
business side for 1 minute and introduce Elie. So for those of you who don't know Elie Saab Jr., he was born with the name of his brand, which we talked about. At what age did he realize that he was going to grow into this? But Elie Saab Sr. is still the chairman and the creative side. So maybe in their instance, one it does more of the creative and one has done more of the business expansion. But since Elie joined in I guess in 2012 you joined, but in 2018 you really took the helm as CEO and transformed what maybe isn't an atelier in Beirut, but it was already a substantial business, but transformed into, there are now 10 residential buildings?
More than 20.
More than 20. 20 residential buildings with 3 in Dubai that are coming into market. There's children's wear and perfumes and furniture, and that all happened since you took over. And so I guess when you think of, have you changed your brand? Have you evolved? Like, how do you think of the narrative that you've told since you've joined?
Honestly, I cannot say I changed the brand. In the contrary, my father had built such an amazing root and such an amazing heritage to the brand, and this is what allowed us to take the brand to where it is, because of how strong the vision towards, and how true my father was to the vision that he had, and the strong DNA that he built over the years that allowed us to venture into all those different verticals. And we did not just decide to venture into those verticals just because we wanted to position ourselves as a lifestyle brand, but I remember since growing up with my father in the business, I knew he always had a vision for architecture. He was building all his homes, he was building all his buildings, he was designing all the interiors. So it is something that was rooted into the vision and what he wanted to do, and an expression he wanted to share with the world. But and this is what was the reason why we entered into lifestyle. It's just not like, okay, you see a lot of brands now doing branded real estate, but then they don't have an idea of what is the vision that they're trying to sell. Whereas we never agreed to do any branded project before having a furniture line. And that furniture line determines our DNA into real estate, which will potentially determine our vision into hospitality potentially. So every angle and every segment that we've entered into, and if I take the example of perfumes, perfumes is also part of our DNA today. A lot of people in the world know Elie Saab through the perfume, and it's an entry point to the brand. And because the brand is so aspirational, it's also a mean to be able to give access to the brand to a wider audience, but then also while selling the dream and the vision and the DNA of what we do and the vision of Elie Saab. So definitely, I cannot say that I have changed. I have just worked with my father's vision to be able to bring it to life in the best possible way, and hopefully much more to do.
Yeah. So Edward, a question for you. When you're telling a story, and you're taking, I guess, just facts or a series of facts, and you're trying to weave them into a narrative, and is that what writing a film is, or creating content? Like, I think of after 5 days with Mike Milken, I can't absorb any more facts, but I can always hear another story. And so how do you think of taking potentially climate, which is so important to you, and when people hear these crazy stats and numbers about the world going to end and what's happening, and you can distill that down and using some of your storytelling techniques to make it more relatable to people?
Absolutely. I totally agree. There's a limit to what facts can convey. We need to pay attention to facts. I mean, data is important because it's perhaps the architecture of the story that we need to understand, or it's the armature or the skeleton of it. But I think, there's one of the great philosophers of story was Joseph Campbell, this professor in the United States who wrote the great book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces and The Power of Myth. And I always think about what he said about stories, all stories. He said for stories to have any power, they have to have transparency. You have to be able to see through the story and see yourself in the story for it to have any kind of emotional power or the power to move you to any kind of action. And he would talk about how that could be just a story around a fire or right up to the mythologies, even the religions, right? That they have power when you can see yourself in them and see how they're really about you. So when it comes to things like the climate challenge, right? Our grandparents went through the global crisis of World War II, and it defined their generation. I don't think there's any question whatsoever that in 1,000 years, the measure of our time will be how we responded to the awareness that we were heading toward a real ecological sustainability crisis. And so we're all involved in this, but it's full of confusing data. And I do think it's very important that we are able to articulate what's going on in ways that people can relate to. Children, the future of your children and your children's children, obviously is a powerful emotional point of connectivity that we all share. And that's a way to invest people in the story of what we need to do and why we need to do it. But I do think you have to find in any complex challenge, if there's a story to be told that helps people come together around it,
and relate to
you've
it.
got to make it transparent for them.
So I would think about the show about F1 that made all of a sudden F1 so much more relatable. I think for my mom and grandmother and people that probably never watched F1. And I know we were talking about this kind of joking last night that we're going to make a movie about Elie Saab and maybe Ed Norton's going to do it. And we put that together at dinner last night. But do you feel that you need to be more transparent and open in order for people to relate to a brand now? Do you have to share more than you did 45 years ago? Does it matter now more to a younger generation that they know exactly what they're wearing? I'm wearing Elie Saab, but where it came from and what the brand stands for?
I think definitely if you see the new brands that came out in the last 5-10 years are brands that have a very strong meaning, that represent something, whether sustainability or a very strong artistic vision. So definitely today's world you need to have a story, but at the same time you cannot make up a story. A story either is authentic and real, but you cannot fool people anymore about a story of making up a brand that people want real things and they cannot be fooled. And as you said, Ed, you need to be transparent, and today people see the reality of things. Today we live in such an open world where everyone has access to everyone's lives and understand exactly what's right and what's wrong, and everyone has an opinion. So for sure, you have to be true to yourself. Whether you're a new brand or you're a heritage brand, you need to be able to communicate about the reality and what is it really that you add to this world and what differentiates you from others.
And tell us, so I was at Elie's incredible event in Saudi a few weeks ago with Celine Dion, who was my Canadian childhood superstar, and J-Lo, and Halle Berry, and Camila Cabello, and all these famous people that Almer Diab, the other people from this region that all performed. So it was called 1001 Seasons.
1001 Seasons.
So what was that about?
Well, first of all, the 1001 Seasons it came from the idea that we wanted to celebrate the 45 years of Elie Saab and what Elie Saab represents. And we had the chance to do it in the region, which is the region where we started from. So Elie Saab started from the region. He expanded from Beirut to the GCC, and then from the GCC to the rest of the world. And after 45 years, he's coming back to the region to celebrate not only the accomplishments of the brand, but to celebrate the region and how the region has also evolved. And we wanted to show the world where we came from and what this region is capable of. And the name 1001 Seasons, everyone is familiar with the 1001 Nights. And of course, we wanted to include the idea of the essence of the Arab world, so 1001 nights, 1001 stories, and as well integrate the idea of seasons, it was part of Riyadh season, and also the seasonality in fashion. And the whole show was a testament of Elie Saab's story, but also Elie Saab's vision to the future. So the whole narrative behind the show, it was a big platform of storytelling. Without having a moderator explaining what's happening, you could see it. It was like a film. And actually, the idea was to put in place an event that was like a fashion film that says a story about a brand. So the first tableau was the tableau of red carpet, which is one of the strong pillars of the brand. So we had to start with it. And of course, by the end of this tableau, everyone had the surprise to see Halle Berry come back on stage 22.
So, yeah,
22,
most people here in this room might not know.
No, 22 years after when she wore her Oscars, when she won her
Halle Berry
Oscars.
was the first African American to win an Oscar, and the night she won the award, she was wearing an Elie Saab dress, which was like an aha type moment. I would
and then
imagine for the
she
brand.
came on stage wearing the same dress.
Yeah.
And honestly, and I remember we had also the voiceover of Russell Crowe at the time that handed her Oscars. The Oscars go to Halle Berry, and then honestly, she was in tears, and it was like we were speaking about this moment and to recreate it, but to see it come to life was like really like exceptional for everyone.
Like your brand is so personal, and you've created an experience for
Same
people.
for the second tableau. So for the second tableau, we had Jennifer Lopez, and the idea of the second tableau was Elie Saab's inspiration when he started. So how the whole idea started. So he was aware about life when he was in the 70s. So of course the 70s is a big source of inspiration for him. But while he was in the 70s, he was also thinking about the 20s. So the second tableau was about the 70s and 20s, and Jennifer helped us bring this tableau to life in an amazing way. And what is good, and the reason why this show was so successful and the reason why people related to it so well is because of the authenticity of the story. And that every person that was involved in the show worked from all their hearts because they've had a relationship with the brand for more than 25 years. So everyone put their best in it, and this is what I was telling you. You cannot fool people, but when people see that everyone's working from their heart, it will be reflected in the grand scheme of things.
Do you think that's different in a family-owned business where the creative director isn't changing every 4 years and redesigning the vision of or direction of the company? Is that do you think that that's easier to do when it's?
It's definitely easier when it's an entrepreneurial business. When the entrepreneur that has a very specific vision of where he wants to take the brand is still there, and that is.
And can I say, I mean, this is really interesting because I think it was exactly to my point. This is the guy that you were saying was the business side of this, and all he's talking about is creative narrative and emotional narrative, really. But now on the business side, I want to mention, I do think it's worth mentioning something we were talking about backstage, which is that we live in a world that tends to put a value on taking companies public, using a lot of leverage. We just went through this era of free money. Everybody's levering up. Everybody's achieving hyper growth with free money. these guys essentially built a family business steadily on pure business fundamentals, moving very incrementally and carefully, and did not get caught out in the leverage trap when money blew up. And I think everything you were describing to me was a real testament to what I would call not old-fashioned or conservative, but really acute business fundamentals that a family-run private company has to do. And there's to me, there's a lot of inspiration in that. I think it's a very strong counterfactual to this idea that we should lever everything up and achieve hypergrowth in incredibly short spans of time, which tends to actually prove to not be that healthy sometimes. And so I think it's fascinating. I think the way you guys have approached it.
It's not very far from also your story, Ed. That I've heard you spoke in the last 2 days, and it's like I've been speaking to a hedge fund manager, a director, an actor. Like he has many hats, and he understand the right and the left brain so well, because at the end, you cannot sell something that you don't understand fundamentally and that you don't believe in, because it is not about numbers. And the difference between a company that is group-owned, at the end they have people that need to deliver numbers and tend to forget about the vision and how they can make a big difference to the world. A lot of people could have done the show we have done. But not a lot of people thought of it, because I think there's a lot of lost in translation when middle management get involved, and then they lose the idea of why they are here and what they need to deliver to the world, which is the fundamental of how to also adapt to an evolving world. Because today, the reason why we wanted to bridge the idea of fashion and entertainment, it was to be able to speak to a wider audience, because at the end, the whole idea of the show that we did was to be able to reach as many people as possible and to deliver our vision to as many people as possible. But you cannot do that by just doing fashion, because how can you have a family sit behind TV and then like have 300 looks come out? Then it's boring. People want to see more than fashion, want to understand more about the brand. And actually, every artist that collaborated with us on the show, so for example, Celine worked with us for 25 years. We've been dressing her in all her concerts. And she came and she worked. She wanted to understand how she will be able to, and she was nervous about it. She did more than 16 rehearsals before the show. And honestly, I cannot express how thankful I was to her and how much dedication she put to be able to project what Elie Saab really represent, and that's a really big blessing.
I think this part of the world has, and where we're sitting today in Abu Dhabi, has done such a great job at that, becoming a global hub, but staying true to their roots and as they modernize. And so as we think, and I know you've had a number of meetings since you've been here with some of the kind of culture and tourism folks, but when you think about Abu Dhabi as an example, for instance, of longevity and health and wellness and so many of the things that maybe the surfing identity impassions you about those traits. And as Abu Dhabi wants to build their brand kind of in that sphere, and I know with some of your kind of commercial movie studios and that you have, and as you think about potentially being able to address that, like how does a city or a country think about changing their narrative? Is it the same way as developing one for a brand for clothing or for a company?
No, that's a super interesting question. I mean, first off, I just want to say that I think the relationships you're talking about forming over time are so enviable. I want to wear an Elie Saab dress, and I feel denied. I feel like I have a premiere on Monday night for this new film about Bob Dylan.
His wife is going to be wearing all Elie Saab.
And my wife, it's like, can't you make a suit? Can't you make a gorgeous?
Yes, we can.
Like, why can't I be inside this club? It's making me think.
That's the next 5 years.
It's making me think I need to be much more fashion forward, and.
No, we like you the way you are, Ed.
Maybe just step out in an Elie Saab dress, but
Not when you're surfing.
No, not when surfing. That wouldn't be good.
I will make a dress for you only if you wear it while
If
surfing.
I wore an Elie Saab, yeah, if I wore an Elie Saab dress surfing, everyone would say it was AI.
Yeah.
They would just say, AI, do Edward surfing in an Elie Saab dress, and that would be an interesting one.
Anyway, we're not going to do that.
No,
in
we
Abu
won't do
Dhabi.
that.
That's not your
Not
idea.
in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah.
But it's funny. I was talking with the Minister of Culture and Tourism this morning, Mohammed Mubarak, and we were having this conversation pretty precisely because I think it's a very interesting thing. The speed of development here and the magnitude of the actual physical development on this gorgeous coastline and the museums and the culture and the architecture and everything, it's very interesting because it has turned people inward toward the spaces that are being created. And one of the things I think is fascinating is this is a coastal culture. Mm-hmm. Like, this is a culture with deep history of connection to the sea, to seafaring, to the desert. And despite the fact that this modern miracle has taken place right there in the margin between the sea and the land, Mohammed and I were talking about the challenge. We know that we need to disconnect from these things more, mm-hmm. and we know we need to reconnect with nature, with not just for environmental sustainability reasons, but for our souls. And he was saying, and I totally agree, that there's a real opportunity but challenge in this region to remind people that sitting right out there is the sea and behind it is the desert, and that these are places of beauty and zen and physical health and experience.
When I think of surfing, I think of like Bali or Malibu and...
No, there's good surfing here.
Really?
Yeah,
there's the wave.
there's
he just came
here.
from surfing. I
there's
don't know if you guys
here.
know what the wave
There
is
also the most incredible synthetic wave that's ever been made in human history is in Abu Dhabi now, and it's so phenomenal. It's such a phenomenal opportunity to introduce a new generation of young. And there's this wonderful story in Abu Dhabi of jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
Jiu-jitsu being mandated, and now you have this whole generation of people who have learned not just the physical things but the spiritual things through jiu-jitsu. And I guess the short answer to your question is I think there's an enormous opportunity here that's authentic, as you say, to the actual historical culture of this region, to connect more deeply with the sea that's over there and the desert that's over there, and make sure that people don't only go inward and into inside spaces, and that they know to come here because they have real access to that natural world, and that was almost fundamental to the life of the tribal culture that was here. And that's a cool challenge. How do you tell this?
Yeah,
how do you remind people? How do you remind people that this is a place to come for that? Not
it's
just
not reminding them. It's teaching them,
re-educating
showing them that it is.
But also to build on what Ed is saying is that if you teach a new generation of people to surf here in the UAE, it's also a way to break the barrier between the East and the West. Because if suddenly you see a UAE citizen surfing in Bali, that's also a part of bringing people together, or someone from the UAE goes surfing in Malibu, where Ed lives, and this is how you're exchanging and breaking the barrier, not only by doing business between countries, but also bringing cultures together and speaking the same language.
Mohammed literally said to me that in his youth, growing up here, one of his fondest memories was on weekends going to the desert with older uncles and things, and sitting around fires and being given a falcon and saying and telling stories, and having surfed a little bit. He said in California the thing that really struck him was actually not what his favorite memory was, sitting in the water with other people, waiting on waves and talking. And I totally agree. I think there's a in these kinds of enterprises, climbing mountains is great, but a lot of times what you end up doing is sitting around and talking. And I think I think the bonds that get formed, the cross-cultural opportunity, the bonds to find common
Yeah.
thing
And one
that,
thing
that
I
are
learned last
available.
night, that they go out there for 2 hours. If you're sitting on an average of 2 hours, you will get 15 to 30 seconds of surfing.
Now that would be a bad day. That would be a bad
and
day.
now at the Wave in Abu Dhabi, you have a guaranteed 90
Yes.
seconds of wave every time you're there. So I mean, the Emiratis might be the best surfers that you see in Malibu in a few years. So
I predict
See the UAE Olympics team for sure.
there will be
This was not a surfing panel,
someone
but I don't
there will
know
be
how-
someone who rises up out of Abu Dhabi because of this synthetic wave and is on the pro tour within the next 10 years. I'll make that bet.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm excited to see that, and I guess everyone here should go and check out the Wave. But if we are to leave the audience with something else other than the tourist tip to go check out the Abu Dhabi Wave, as people here probably are out maybe pitching their company or their fund, and they're having meetings, and as they're telling facts, do you think that it's important in every interaction and meeting to try and weave in a story? Like, how important is that to conveying a message?
I think it's everything you have. It's your story and why you're doing what you're doing and where you're going. So, and the more true to yourself that you are, the more easy it is to convey that message and to have people trust and believe in you. So at the end, if you don't have a story, you don't have anything.
Okay.
I totally agree. I think it can't all be dollars and cents. I think what engages a person across the table from you the most, I think, is the feeling that they find conviction in your passion for whatever you're trying to say. And I think it's not spreadsheet. It's not all spreadsheets. I think a lot of it is belief and vision.
Yeah.
And a lot of the young entrepreneurs is like by telling their story and of where they were and where they're going is usually where they get the most feedback. And this is where they need to know that they need to work on themselves even more to be ready for the next pitch they will have. So it's never perfect from day one. So if you
good actors rehearse a lot,
Yeah.
and so should everybody else.
all the biggest entrepreneurs of the world, they have been rejected more than 100, 200 times, but it's also their persistent and their perseverance that allow them to keep on working on themselves and evolving to get to the point where they can be eligible to financing, they can be eligible to building a team and growing their business. So it doesn't happen overnight.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah,
I think that's it. So tell more stories and check out the Wave. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining the lunch program. Please make your way to the foyer as we prepare for our next session. We also look forward to seeing you at our dinner program tonight. Join us as we hear from AI experts with local and global perspectives, along with a surprise musical performance. Doors will open at 7 p.m.